All right, hello everyone. I'm Ryan. I'm actually the architect on CloudPoint, so hopefully I can answer any questions you have, at least in technical areas. I was going to start off with a slide, but since everyone really is ready for a demo, I'll start with a demo. If we want to, we can go to a slide later. It's only one anyways. All right, so here's CloudPoint. So let me just go ahead and log in. If I can type. All right, so you first take into a quick screen that'll just give you a quick overview of everything to see if everything is looking good or not. Then to actually start doing stuff, you go to the dashboard. And here's your single pane of view. This is just showing you everything across all of your clouds. If you wanted to look at just a specific cloud, you can choose one out of here. But in general, you just want to see, is everything on all my clouds working fine?
This is running where?
This right now is running in AWS.
Okay.
And in terms of the overhead of running this in there, right now we recommend a T2 large, so it's not a huge requirement in terms of CPU and memory and things like that. And it has like a 50 gigabyte EBS volume, so it's not a huge amount of storage, and that volume is mainly for storing the asset database.
What about the metadata then?
That's the asset database. So just remembering all of the different things that we've discovered, relationships between them, stuff like that. Okay, and so once you got started off, you'd basically want to go in here, and you'd be able to see all the different things we support. This is both the clouds and the arrays that we support currently. And I've already got configured AWS and Azure, so you can see both of them are working even from the same box. And if you just wanted to add another one, it's as simple as just going in, add configuration, put in access key, secret key, choose which regions you want to protect. Pretty simple. So then going back to our dashboard. So down here we can see the different things that we've already discovered now. You have applications and file systems, as well as the hosts and the disks. Right now it shows an application. So we mentioned earlier that we support RDS, and this is discovering an RDS instance directly out of AWS. And this is, again, using all the APIs provided by AWS, so we can detect, discover it, create snapshots of it, take those snapshots, replicate them to somewhere else so you can restore in a different region, or just to have an extra copy for redundancy. If you were to also go into a host and configure something like Oracle or MongoDB, then those would also show up here. So let's go ahead and just, policies have to run in the background, so let's go ahead and create one. We have a couple set up already. This is running every week. This is running every day. Sorry, but that's going to take too long to run. So I don't want to take a day to do this demo. So I'll just create a demo policy, and we'll just say. So you can do time-based retention or just keep however many copies you want to keep. We'll just do 2 copies, and let's say we run this every 2 minutes. So I'm sure it'll eventually run. And now there's different ways that you can snapshot your workload in the cloud. So first you could snapshot the entire host, and this is going to keep your OS and your application and all of its data and everything bundled into one snapshot, so then you can just spin up a whole new one quickly from whenever you want to. Or maybe you say, I don't really care about keeping the OS, I'm just going to spin up another AMI or something. But what I really care about is protecting just my data. So then you can just say disk, and that means that we're going to find your application, and we're going to say which disks are actually being used by the application and just protect those. So I'll go ahead and do that. And there's also an enable replication option here, which just so this runs faster, I won't add that. I won't select that for now. OK, so our policy is defined. If you did want to set up replication, this currently is only supported in AWS, and that's because AWS provides the APIs for taking one of these snapshots and moving them into another region. If you're in Google, they're actually already doing that for you, so you don't need to do that. And at least at the moment, we don't have APIs in Azure to just easily copy the snapshots into other regions. But Azure seems to be adding new APIs all the time. And this is just a simple set of rules. So if, depending on where it is now, let's say if it's in US West 1, then you can choose up to 3 different destinations of where you want it to copy to. So you can control exactly where it's going to go. If it's, if you don't want it to go outside the country or something like that, you can prevent that. Okay, so now policy is useless unless it's applied to something. So here's a bunch of hosts. Sorry, actually not hosts. So let's do a file system. So here's a file system. Maybe you have some custom application running on there that we don't yet support, or you just have some interesting files there. So you can select your policy, assign that. There. So now every 2 minutes, that's going to, or what did I put? Did I put 2 minutes? Yeah, every 2 minutes, that's going to create a new snapshot. It's only going to keep the last 2.
Is it possible to assign policy based on tagging in AWS?
That's not there yet. That is something we're working on.
So that now is then triggering an AWS snapshot of the VM where you found that file system?
So in this case, we said to do a disk level snapshot in that policy. So this is a file system. I'll show you in a second. We've already set up agentless on this. So it's going in, it's going to find that file system and freeze it. Then it's going to go trigger the snapshots of the AWS, let's say the EBS volumes, and then unfreeze your file system when that's done.
Okay. So it lives in a snapshot, an AWS snapshot, basically.
Yes.
But
yes.
Depending on the policy, you're treating that differently in CloudPoint.
Depending.
Because if it was a host-based or a volume-based, those kind of things, ultimately,
right.
All I'm going to see is a bunch of snapshots in AWS, but in CloudPoint, because the policy that was applied when that snapshot was taken, you're doing different, not necessarily doing different things, but it a
little different. I mean, so in this case, because we said disk, it's going to just find those EBS volumes and create snapshots of those. Whereas for AWS, if you said host, then it's going to create an AMI out of that. Now, the equivalent in Google and Azure isn't the same as an AMI in that it will only have the boot disk. Like if you have an image in Azure or Google, that's just the boot disk. That's not really protecting your entire VM. So we've actually gone and created a construct around that. So we snapshot all the disks in the entire VM and group them together internally. So you can still do a whole host snapshot, even though the APIs aren't actually there for the host. But at least in AWS, there are APIs, so we're using those directly. Okay, so now the real interesting stuff is when you're actually, wait, what did I just click? What you really care about, though, is protecting your applications, whether it's just the file system or an actual application running on the host. So to do that, you want to connect to your host. So I could take one of these, for example, and first you want to connect to it. So that's how we can get onto it. And these are our 2 different options. One is I can actually just install something. Maybe you don't feel comfortable with having SSH access to your host. You just want to have something that's installed there. So you can download an RPM and install it on there. And that's actually a self-updating. It's very lightweight. It's a very small package that we install. And it's self-updating. Every time it contacts back, it checks to see if there's any updates. So once you put it there, you forget about it. You don't even have to worry about managing it in any way. But if you like SSH, because you don't like having to install RPMs, yeah, we have that option as well. So you type in your username. You can use a password or an SSH key to connect to that.
So that's mounting a snapshot that was backed up to another location to a different instance altogether. Is that right?
So this is configuring it so that we can look at what's inside the host and figure out what file systems and applications are there.
Deploy
Right.
the agent in the host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, you
Understood.
don't get visibility into your host. You don't know what's there. This is what allows us to see inside the host.
Okay, I understand.
So when you, if you look at NetBackup, you would have had credentials, and you could use which credentials you would point at a particular instance. Why do you not do that with the API key? It would be nice to have a credentials list you could then point at, because you had thousands of VMs.
Yeah,
Having an API key that was on a list would be more practical to target it with.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that we're definitely looking at doing, is finding easier ways for configuring a lot of these. I think one of the ideas was that you might have many different people who know those credentials, and so they could actually come in here, they see their hosts, and then from there they can say, okay, well, here's my username and password, and it could be a stored credential that you apply to it. For now, that's not there, but it's something we could add.
And about the endpoint, do your agent fix the endpoint, or the client can choose the endpoint he wants?
Endpoint in what sense?
to point the API, because you have to request through the API, and the API is you can reach it with an IP address and an endpoint.
The API for doing which APIs? Talking about like the cloud APIs or the CloudPoint APIs?
The CloudPoint API.
It's expected that you've set it up with a host name that's going to be fixed in some way.
Yes.
Yeah. And we actually ask you that up front because we need to be able to generate certificates for security purposes as well. So yeah, you should set up a host name that's going to be static for CloudPoint.
I know one of the things we talked about was where you deploy the CloudPoint instance. I'm assuming in order for it to have SSH access, you either have to expose SSH to the public internet or have the instance, or have the CloudPoint running in a VPC or something that has access SSH into that.
Yeah, so I guess the big caveat on all these things is, of course, you have to have the networking set up so that there is some sort of connectivity. We can't, magically break through firewalls. Yeah, you can have connectivity in there. Depending on how you want to set that up. That's another reason why you might choose SSH over an installed versus an installed agent, because the agent connects outward, whereas SSH connects inward. Depends on how you want to set up your firewalls.
What about the storage of the SSH keys that you're giving for access? Where are those keys being stored and how are they being secured?
They're being stored internally in our asset database, and it is being encrypted. We don't have support yet for like an external KMS, but that's something we'd probably add on in the future. I figured,
KMS or Azure Key Vault.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely services in the cloud, and we'll be looking at integrating with those as we go forward.
Okay.
I mean, I think the main design idea around all this was to get something that works everywhere and then start customizing it for all those places. So that, certainly we'll be looking at leveraging more of the cloud APIs going forward.
For a Windows instance, does that then require the agent since
right now
normally support SSH?
Right, yes. At the moment, you have to install an agent on Windows.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there are a couple of hosts that I've already set up. So this icon shows you that we've actually already been successfully able to connect to it. And so if you wanted to set up an application on here, then all you just go here, click on Configure, and you see what applications are available. So if you had Oracle, for example, then you don't require your configuration, just save, and you would go in and discover all of your running Oracle instances. So once all that's set up, then you'll start seeing things, applications if you've configured any, and also in file systems. So I was looking at one of these file systems earlier. Now there's a few interesting things with the file systems. First thing is that you can go in, they've already created a snapshot on here. And now with the file system, you might want to say recover a file. I can restore the entire file system if I really wanted to. And we actually have the intelligence to, since this is running some code on the host, we can go in, find that file system, unmount it, detach the disk from the instance while it's running, attach a new restored copy, and remount that file system. So when you're done, the host has been up the entire time. When you're done, that file system now has just been reverted to its old state. But you might not want to recover the entire file system, of course. So you can go in here, click granules for doing granular restore, and now you see here's a list of all your files. And I can do searches on this. This was just a copy of etc, so I can search for something like the password file, and now I can see all the files that match that. So you can find your files pretty easily. Select maybe a couple of these, and then just restore those. So it'll give you a confirmation showing you which files it's going to restore, where it's going to end up restoring that. So what this is doing in the background is now it's taking those EBS volumes, attaching them to the original host and mounting the file system there, and then just copying back whichever files you wanted and cleaning the whole thing up. So when you're done, just those files will have been replaced. Now the other thing that you can do, so first to have been able to do that, you need to index a file system. But while we're indexing it, we can also go classify it. So we can go look at the contents of all these files using the Veritas information classifier and just see if there's any violations. So I've already set up a policy in Vic for detecting some types of personally identifiable information. And this has got classified and everything's fine. We didn't detect anything. But something could have happened since then. So let's say we're going to create a new snapshot now. It's a file system, so I just care about snapshotting the disks. Click save. So this is going off and doing everything that I described before, freezing the file system, taking the snapshots, and then remembering all that information in our asset database. So now I have my new file system here, it's a new snapshot. Now I can go ahead and click index and classify. So that's just going to run in the background. And now this is the one case where we do need connectivity to the actual cloud where it's running. Location. You need to be located in the cloud, so that we can take that volume, attach it to our host, and start doing all this post-processing. But this avoids having to do all that processing on the host itself. So if you wanted to figure out what's going on a host, you don't have to go run a bunch of stuff that's taking up CPU on the host where your application's already running. And the job log is showing that we're going ahead and running that job in the background. And you can also see that the policy is running. We can look at that later. All right. Oh, no, tags found. OK, something definitely happened. Something went wrong. Someone put something there that they shouldn't have. So we can go investigate and see there's a couple of different violations. This is based on the policy that it's set up. Oh, OK, we're PII. OK, it was on this file system. Now I can go into here and view the snapshots. And it shows now on this that I had PII and authentication tags found. And again, you can see which snapshot had that. And then you go yell at the person who put that thing there that wasn't supposed to be there, and then say, OK, now I have to go and delete your snapshot.
What's a granule?
In this case, it's a file.
Right.
It's basically, right now we're doing this at a file level, but in the future we could do things like database tables and things like that. So it's something within the asset that you can restore without having to restore the entire asset.
Right.
Do we know what was found in terms of PII? It was the file or?
I think it stores just the tags that were found. It doesn't show you the exact text that was found in the files.
How do you make sure that's not a false positive?
Was that? Let's
Trust the tags.
Admin shouldn't see the contents of the tags, though.
Oh, there we go.
So yeah, so this actually, I think there's a way of searching directly for it, but this also shows you in a particular file that there is PI, so you can see this is the one.
But I guess the question is, what would you search for? I mean, how would you? So it comes up and provides details that say, hey, there's something in that file that is outside of compliance. Mm-hmm. How do you go the next step of determining what it is in that file that's out of compliance or take action on it?
I mean, I think at this point we don't have a way of drilling into that file and showing you here's exactly what I found, and is this a false positive and that kind of thing. This is just sort of making you aware that something is there, and then you can go follow up. What file system was and what host. You can go ask the admin for that. What's going on there?
But if that maybe I'm missing something. So you know that there's a piece of PII data in there.
Yes.
But you're not able to get into the file to say that what it is.
We are not, when we do the classification.
How do you know it's actually in there?
So let me chime in here. The classification is based on a policy, and the policy has specific tags. Yeah. So the tag in this particular case, I guess, is called PII, but it could be called, for example, SSN. It could be called something else. So based on that, you would know that this is the tag that was found, if you configure it that way. What we are doing is we are going through that file, and we are indexing the whole file, and we are figuring out if those tags exist. Right now, we do not have an ability to show the file itself on the GUI. We don't show the file itself.
And the tag is set by what?
That's the information classifier.
Regular expressions.
Yeah, it's basically a bunch of different pattern matching logic.
And can you add your own? Yeah, configurable.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's.
Okay.
We can add. So there is a different GUI for that, where we can actually we can show some default policies. We have got certain default policies, but you can also add policies.
Yeah. So this is the Veritas information classifier, and these are all the different policies that are supported there. And you can just I set up specifically looking for PII somewhere down here, But there's a lot of other things. Yeah, this one you can see is enabled. So that's why I was looking specifically for that. And there's a lot of different patterns and rules that it can match.
Where are you getting those? Sorry. Yeah, where are you getting those from?
Question.
Getting what? How do I get to this page?
No, those patterns, are they open standards, or can I rely on that? Do I need to review it? Are you getting it from the agencies, or?
I don't know a whole lot of details of the classifier itself.
Those are open
Yeah,
data.
we built actually the whole classification, then there are 120 plus.
So,
You need a mic here.
Yeah, actually we built a classification engine where we identify it based on certain standards, and there are at least 120 plus different types of classification mechanisms that are there, and we follow that.
So they're based on where the
Specific
tags are
standards, and yeah, we
specific
follow the
based on
GDPR
that.
standards. Yes, all those are part of the
So you
classification
can
engine.
see like Internal Revenue Service, and you can see different ones.
Yeah, I can see that, but I mean, I could write that myself and say I'm looking for one thing, but like, yeah, okay.
Well, you could, but will we trust it?
It's in legislation. It's like,
It's
you
a-
can go look up the law
Veritas.
if you want to. That's
Yes.
where it's at.
right. So then, yeah. So then I think the only other thing I was going to show is that once you have some of these snapshots here, you can you can by policy you can do some sort of replication, but you can also just manually replicate it. And so this was already in one of the regions, so we can actually send it to say, US West 1 and replicate. So once this is done, so it's going to take a little while. It's going to be using APIs to copy the entire AMI to another region. Once it's there, it's going to show up as another snapshot in this list. And then you can actually start doing restores. And right now, if you have one of these snapshots, you can do a restore in the region where it's currently located, basically where the original asset was. But by replicating it to another region, now I'm actually able to do a restore in the new region as well.
And presumably you could do that for the whole application, you were saying?
Well, since it's an entire host, that host is just a snapshot of it. It'll come back up once you...
But you had the policy there where you had multiple, you could have an application, so that would tie together multiple hosts, and then...
If you had it, yeah, I mean, currently we don't support multi-application hosts, but that is something that we can do in the future.
Multi-application?
Sorry, multi-host applications the other way around.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So what was the application drop down in the policy? I thought that was...
That's actually currently that's only being used by RDS. And
Okay, cool. No,
again, I said you can snapshot the host, you can snapshot the disk. Well, RDS is neither of those, right?
Yeah.
So that's what that's for.
Okay, but you couldn't quiesce a group of hosts at the same time?
You could. The framework is there. We just don't have that support, any applications yet that are supporting that.
And then you could QS that and have that replicated to ship it to another region?
Yes.
Potentially, okay.
So like, for example, going forward, supporting replication sets in MongoDB. You could, basically find all the replica nodes on different hosts, snapshot all of those at once, and then replicate the entire set.
So with the stuff you were showing a minute ago with the tags and things like that, do you have any e-discovery plugins or compliance or anything so you could plug this into the third parties or other tools that are...
We don't have anything like that yet.
Okay, so that's entirely programmed by someone coming into this interface and doing those pieces.
The programming of the policies?
Well, and discovery, that compliance discovery as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you'd go and basically, like I showed earlier, you'd go into the dashboard or even go into the copy screen and see tags found.
But it's all GUI based. Yeah.
Yes, at the moment it is.
And it's all based on what you provide rather than established e-discovery vendors that might want to just tap into this and use their discovery and indexing and those kind of things.
Right.
Yes.
Is that something you're planning to open up? Because you've got the data here and you're...
That's more of a PM question, I think. Sorry, I'm just an engineer. I don't...
We have been considering some of those things, yes.
Because it's fairly unique to be able to open up a snapshot
Right.
and look in it. I think other vendors are planning to do the same thing, but the fact you've got that there,
Okay.
you've solved the hard part of the problem of exposing that, to
Correct.
be able to index that snapshot, EBS snapshot. Okay.
Yeah.
And we do offer completely independent e-discovery based platform or solutions. Yeah.
And does that integrate with
That's independent of this, but yeah, we do have those solutions as
But
well.
it's independent, but it integrates with this.
Some of the classification that's leveraged across the products, but it's not integrated.
Okay, so you offer a product, but it doesn't
Yes.
work with this.
Yeah, right.
Right, okay.
Okay. Any other questions on the demo? Okay. Do you want to see a slide?
Oh, please.
So I'm an engineer. I don't like slides very much, but
That's a great slide.
so I was at least going to go into just an overview of basically the architecture. Right. And so basically, as we had sort of discussed before, CloudPoint's based on microservices. So all these different boxes over here are a bunch of different microservices working together. All the communication happening over a message bus with each other. The more interesting part, two interesting parts I think are first the REST API. The UI is built entirely upon the REST API. In fact, for the first few months of development, we didn't have a UI. It's entirely APIs that we were using. So if you didn't like using a UI for some reason, like you want to script it, you just like going to the console, I don't know. The API gives you the full functionality of the entire product. There's nothing that the UI is doing that isn't exposed over REST. It's also going to help you a lot if you want to plug into an existing framework for managing things, you want to automate the entire process. On the other side, we have a few interesting parts, which are the coordinator is kind of like the brains of everything. It has MongoDB that is providing the asset database, and so we're scanning everything, kind of pulling everything together and figuring out the relationships between them, so they can figure out, if I'm trying to create a snapshot of Oracle, what does that mean? What is it? What storage is it on? What host is it running on? Things like that. And it can do that very quickly. It's not having to go out and scan everything in real time. And then at the bottom here, we have the off-host agent, and that's where we're running a bunch of plugins to actually talk to the remote APIs. And this is a plugin-based architecture so that we can very quickly go in and add new applications and new cloud providers and new array vendors very quickly into this without having to change the rest of the product. So right now, everything that you saw in the demo that had something to do with AWS or Azure, the UI doesn't really know about it. The infrastructure doesn't know about it. That was all figured out dynamically from these plugins. So we can just throw in a new one, and you're done. And the same plugin framework is actually running on the host, whether you're using SSH to push some logic there temporarily, or if you're installing an actual package. So it's using the same type of framework. So again, we can start adding in applications very quickly to provide new protections for new applications without having to re-architect the entire product.
So this is being built from the ground up?
Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't reuse bits from previous products in the portfolio?
I doubt MongoDB is being used by NetBackup.
No. No, that's the impression I got.
Yes.
Yeah. Or RabbitMQ for that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's important because the reason I mention it is my first impression of this was this is just a virtual appliance of some existing technology that people who were running on-premise, and it's being brought into a cloud environment. And that's something that companies were doing back in 2008 and 2009. Mm-hmm. So I'm pleased to actually see something that's net new.
Yes, this is an
entirely
new code being built.
Of something.
Of course, the challenge with that is that you've got all these customers who know and love NetBackup, so they want to bridge across to cloud. They don't necessarily want to. Like, it would be nice if I could just use the stuff I've already got to also do this new thing, rather than have to go and build a completely new solution just for cloud.
Well, that is why we're doing the integration with NetBackup. So those who are familiar and love the NetBackup interface, they can just trigger all these things through NetBackup and don't have to worry about this whole new interface. I have to learn a whole new thing.
Yeah.
And there is a catch-22 there, isn't it? We want to see innovation, but then we don't want to see change. And we can't have both of those at the same. And I'd rather have the innovation rather than just something that's been shoehorned from a legacy.
Yeah, it's not. But I mean, again, large enterprises not that trivial, because you've got to change the processes, which is the big, like the technology stuff. That's easy. Changing the way people talk to each other and do their jobs is really hard because people hate change.
But if you never do that, then you never get to do a kind of code-based review of how you did things before, and you're stuck.
Welcome to the enterprise.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I don't know. Well, theoretically, no. However, years of experience tells us that, yeah, it probably does. Because it hasn't, I don't think changing it is that easy. Like, it shouldn't be. But it totally is.
I want everything better, but nothing to change.
That's right. And that's the tension.
We've had this debate about other vendors this week, haven't we, that have a long-standing relationship with customers, and we've demanded something new and something innovative.
Yeah. Well, that's the classic. That's the core of Christensen's innovator's dilemma, really, is that,
To the point that they've had to set up unique business units within their own organisations to get these projects off the ground.
Yeah.
Because there is intransigence and resistance from elsewhere in the business.
Which is that whole, rather than bridge across to new, is embrace the new, build a new, and then just gradually let the other thing die, and if you can, accelerate its demise.
Yeah, I think it's
move to here.
It's actually probably more nuanced than that, which is the classic architectures don't work in the new methods, or don't work in the new world. And so you have to come up with a new way of approaching those problems, but at the same time, you have to find a good way to help onboard the existing footprint. And that's the challenge that exists, not just in this space, but across the board with enterprises. And where we've seen pockets of reducing that friction and moving things across, there's been just widespread adoption and great success. So the point is, whoever figures out how to pull that cork out, that's who's going to just suck it up and win it, and what's left is going to be wasteland.
Can I ask, before this
and
product...
That's not a bad thing, that's a good thing.
Before this product was developed, if I had tons of data in AWS, what were you guys offering as a way of backing that up?
What did we offer?
Before you had this?
Stick a NetBackup agent.
You can run NetBackup in the cloud. You can run some of the existing backup products in the cloud itself. But obviously that, this becomes a more cloud-native solution.
So that approach was tried before as a quick way of offering that continuity and service to existing customers in the cloud.
I think this is also kind of a unique situation in that even if you do come up with a new way to address the problem, and you do start to take net new demand in that direction, the very nature of what we're talking about here requires you to have that history. And unless you have some way to ingest that history into this new process, which I think is a big question mark as to whether you could or whether you would.
Why would you go ingest your history?
No, I'm saying you have to do something with the history.
Yeah, but you just leave it.
Well, can you?
But with
for
this,
example, so let me give you an example. So we hear a lot about all-in, which I think is also just a total red herring, because every example of that is not actually all-in. But as an enterprise moves to a cloud-based world, and they've moved a significant amount of their footprint to a cloud-based world, but they still need to maintain an amount of history and archives for compliance reasons or non-compliance reasons. What do? Just leave it in a NetBackup appliance that's sitting in a closet somewhere? I mean, there's no place to restore it to, even if they did do that. So you have to figure out some means in which to carry that history forward long enough until it's no longer needed.
But I think the difference here is what you're...
It's not clear.
No, it's really hard. And you know what else? The legacy provider of the storage device on-prem, that's your archive or what have you. Maybe it's your mail archive or your on-prem document managed archive. They're going to try to tax you as you egress that data off the device.
Sure.
So they're going to make it more expensive, and that is a real challenge. They don't want you to leave their device, so you almost have to pick their cloud offering and hope that they,
have a way to ingest it
without much cost.
Right.
You're gonna have a multi-cloud hybrid environment for a long, long time. So the idea, you just leave that appliance there and it backs up that environment and looks at, and ideally you have this holistic view of things that are backing things up natively in the best way they can in AWS, using snapshots and those things rather than drop agents. And things like RDS, things like that, you can't do it. You have to use the native tools.
Yeah.
And ideally you want to look at all of that and age it with the product on-prem. But from all of the people we've seen today, no one has, or this week, no one's shown an RDS product. So here you're kind of going, if that's the way I want to back up RDS and I want to do something different, then you would pick this solution on its own. And you make the compromise that you're now managing two products, but at least you're doing it in the best way possible, backing that up. And you have to make sure you're comfortable with that compromise.
Agreed, but RDS is just one component.
Yeah.
Like you said, enterprises already live in a hybrid world, but as they start shifting workloads back and forth, right, going one direction when we start talking about IoT and edge, going the other direction when we start talking about public cloud, you're going to have this really complicated situation where a given workload, essentially, any given workload could potentially move from a traditional stack to a private cloud stack, a composable stack, hyperconverged doesn't really matter in this case. But let's say it moves to public cloud. Great. So now you've orphaned that history. And if you need to get back to that history, you essentially have to figure out, maintain a way to spin that up locally. But
then if you
start to get some continuity issues.
You leave an agent in. I mean, I think you pick the right tool and you take the compromises on board as you're doing those things. So if you want to move that as you follow, then you go, that's fine, I'll stick with that solution.
But
trying to get a solution that does all of that.
But my point is play that out over time. So you do that for 1, then you do it for 2, then you do it for 50, then you do it for 100. This starts getting really messy and really complicated. And I was kind of hoping
but people aren't going to wait
some of that
for a holistic solution
today.
No, this is where shadow IT and these kind of pieces come from. They're not going to go, I'm not going to do IoT until I can do that holistic. They're going to go, well, I'll live with the fact that I'm going to have to manage two separate.
Or just a convenient fire. Cleansing nuclear fire. Or, just, oh no! Oh, alas, my warehouse has flooded and I have lost all of my backup tapes. Oops.
Sorry? You just wanted to make us scared at the end. It's like, that's the end.
Well, we know Justin's approach to evolution now.
All I wanted to do was test that Boring Company flamethrower. I didn't know the tapes were that flammable.
But I think, one of the pieces to kind of take away, just in some, not just specific to Veritas, but kind of going back to the conversations about, or the comments about the different companies we've seen this week, nobody's really thinking about this complicated problem. And this gets back, Jeff, to something you had touched on, something we've talked about offline, which is living in the enterprise is a really complicated world. Mm-hmm. And I feel like many of the folks either don't understand it or don't appreciate it, but they're definitely not thinking about how do we address that complicated world to help smooth things as best we can. I don't think we're going to get to a point where there's one solution that fixes all of this. I mean, that's
no panacea.
No, there isn't. There isn't. But I still think there's a lot of work to be done.
And maybe it's in some kind of indexing tool or whatever that plugs. So you're using different solutions, the best thing, but you can overarch to plug in to find out, and you accept the fact you've got those silos everywhere,
sure.
But you know where to go to restore that thing from wherever it was. I don't know.
I mean,
there'll be 3 of them, and then I'll need an indexer for my indexes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, case in point,
no.
You look at like CloudPoint. This is kind of an interesting approach, right? Looking at it across different cloud providers. Okay, that's kind of cool.
And I like the fact that it isn't wedded to NetBackup or something like that. So if you do require the solution to say, I want to back up Mongo or I want to back up RDS, and that's what I need to tackle, then you could pick this up off the shelf and put it in, and you do that as part of but
here's the problem with that. As we get to more complicated stacks for applications, I might have some of my application stack sitting in RDS and some of it sitting on-prem or sitting in some other means. How do I start to think about this instead of discrete? How do I back up this particular bit bucket to how do I back up this service?
Yeah, I think we're missing a point here. Is like we're actually at the vendor who's made these decisions to change the way they do things. So rather than us debating amongst ourselves whether it should be done one way or the other, or why you would do it one way or the other, we can actually turn that question to Veritas and say, if the previous model was just NetBackup, an existing product that had been moved into a cloud, and you went down this direction to do a complete re-architecture, what made you make that decision? What was not working about the method that led to the development of this product?
I can answer that from an engineering side. I don't know if there's a
Engineering would be brilliant.
So honestly, CloudPoint started out as a technology that NetBackup was going to consume entirely to allow it to accelerate its development, to allow it to do snapshot-based management within NetBackup directly. But as a standalone service, that would make it much easier, much less dependent on NetBackup in its own release cycles. But as we started developing, we realized it's like, well, there's no reason that this has to be tied to NetBackup. Let's just make it a separate product, and then it built it out as its own product. So it started off realizing that NetBackup needed more agility, and that's why we're still doing the integration, because it needs the agility. But on its own, it makes sense too.
So to answer Tim's point about that
That's a very
hybridity.
similar story to what NetApp said earlier this week.
Yeah.
They needed to free themselves from some of the cycles of an existing product range so they could innovate faster. Sorry to interrupt.
But just on Tim's point, so could I have, if I was putting some pieces on RDS and putting some parts of my application, putting some bits on-prem, could I use NetBackup to manage a policy which through CloudPoint backed up the RDS snapshot and also backed up my on-premise VMs or data? So I can still use NetBackup as that one point to go to.
Yes, so that's the vision. We haven't
That's the vision.
That's,
At the
we
moment,
haven't
it's entirely
implemented it
separate.
yet, but it's pretty soon that we want to do that. So to answer her question, right? So one of the things in NetBackup is, of course, we support certain workloads, traditional workloads, and we're trying to expand the workloads. We wanted to accelerate that piece because we see a lot of new workloads coming in, NoSQL, now the cloud workloads, and so on. And we wanted to proliferate that much faster. So with separating it out and even making it independent, we were able to move faster on this. And we want to actually, we have two sets of customers. One is existing NetBackup users who want to use NetBackup to protect cloud workloads, protect new on-prem workloads, and they want to manage it from the NetBackup management console. So that's why we are working on this integration, which we should be releasing very soon, where you can do all that from NetBackup Management Console.
But with CloudPoint as a proxy.
With CloudPoint as a proxy, right? So you don't have to go to CloudPoint console, but you do everything from NetBackup. Whereas there is another set of customers, it's like, we want to use a standalone thing. We only need separate thing for cloud because we've got a separate group managing the cloud maybe. They are not managing NetBackup. It's a different admin, different persona, and they would just use CloudPoint standalone.
That makes sense. If you want a holistic, plug it into the existing NetBackup, you're not wedded to that. So people aren't thinking, I want to do this, but I've got to consume NetBackup to be able to enable this piece. So to me, that makes sense.
I'd like to just say one thing I saw during your demo on CloudPoint was the list of the different PII instruments that are needed. And I've seen that kind of list in a number of places over the last 2 years, and it's increasing. So I really appreciated it that it was in there because you're going to keep the admin from having to do a bunch of guesswork. Mm-hmm. He's going to be able to say, well, I'm a corporation located in the United States. These are the rules that should apply. Right. Identify in the backup any PII that relates to a 9-digit social security number. So you've helped the admin there. I've seen Office 365 do that. I've seen Zscaler do that. Mm-hmm. A whole bunch of cloud players are putting in that structure because the law is coming. Right. The law is, it may be GDPR, it may be state regulations, or it may be, self-regulation.
Absolutely.
But the law is coming to IT. And so you I appreciated that you had that in your product. It's going to take a lot of learning on the part of IT to understand what that stuff is. But it's critical. I mean, you don't want your organization to be fined, or you don't want to lose your job because you're inappropriately handling data. So absolutely. I recognize something from my own career in that area.